Coming up, two women who changed the royal family forever. The Queen's children see their marriages break down, and a princess loses the man she loves. It's The Royal View, Royals on the Rocks. I'm Tim Vincent, and this is the show which brings you the truth behind the royal family's most talked about moments with the people who know best. In this episode, Her Majesty's marriage stands firm as a fairy tale wedding ends in tragedy. And you'll hear how two Americans, nearly 90 years apart, would change the course of modern royal history. From the woman for whom a king abdicated to the actress who charmed a prince and tore up the royal rulebook. With me are four people who have unique insight into the British monarchy. Royal history expert and co-author of The Ring and The Crown, Sarah Griswood. He witnessed firsthand the marriage of Charles and Diana fall apart, former butler to the Prince and Princess of Wales, Paul Burrell. The man whose publications broke nearly all the royal divorce stories, former British newspaper editor Neil Wallace. And royal biographer and author of Harry, Life, Loss and Love, Katie Nicholl. Welcome to you all. Katie, you've covered many, many royal breakups, but which divorce, in your opinion, would stand out as the most damaging to the royal family?
Well, ironically, the divorce of someone that wasn't a member of the royal family per se, but Wallis Simpson, who had two divorces behind her. And of course, when Edward VIII decided that he was going to marry her, I mean, that really threatened to unhinge all of the royal constitution on which the monarchy is built. So I think that has got to be the most damaging in history.
It's only 90 years ago, and it's hard for us to see why that would have been such a big thing. Was it such a big thing?
Oh, it absolutely was. Well, of course, there is the fact that the King, the Queen, Supreme Governor of the Church of England, which has very mixed messages about the remarriage of anyone with a spouse still living. I mean, that's still a big issue today. I mean, Wallis Simpson was deemed unsuitable in many other ways as well. Her Americanism even, but certainly that rather raffish reputation that clung to her.
But he was arguably the least suitable of kings.
That's certainly true.
Well, this is the moment that royal history changed forever.
On December the 11th, 1936, came the broadcast that would stun the world.
You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne. But I want you to understand that in making up my mind, I did not forget the country or the empire. But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do, without the help and support of the woman I love.
Well, Sarah, not since Henry VIII's divorce was such a big deal, but can you elaborate on why it was such a huge ramification to the whole nation, to the whole world?
The abdication and the fact that the king was actually prepared to give up his throne. It did just seem unthinkable. I think it seemed unthinkable to the rest of the royal family. But there was, as you've just said, this idea that actually wouldn't we possibly be rather better without King Edward VIII. So there was a kind of, undertow, a sort of political establishment undercurrent that was actually really quite keen to seize the opportunity. And Mrs. Simpson believed that she had been used as a pawn by the men at the palace, the men in Whitehall, that actually all she'd wanted was a fun, flattering fling, and then she found herself caught like an animal in a trap, she wrote.
Neil, do you agree with that version of events? And also, he features quite heavily in The Crown to begin with. Is it a love story? Was it something that just happened to spiral out of control?
I think it was a love story from Edward's point of view, a self-obsessed, very insecure, narcissistic man who really was most unsuitable as a king. And I think one of the things we need to, why Katie's so right about this, you've got to remember the time. This was
90 years ago.
Yes, but the point being, it was 20 years, only 20 years, since all the Russian royal family had been murdered. You know, there was chaos going on in Europe as, you know, the Nazis arose. This was a very febrile time. And so the establishments of the time believed that this was a very dangerous, shaky moment in history.
That's a good point.
How much did we really know about Wallis Simpson, then?
We know a fair amount because we've got a lot of her letters. But the other point here, of course, it's also a time when divorce was regarded very, very differently from the way it is today. You know, you couldn't even present divorced people to royalty often. So, how could it possibly work for the king to marry one of them?
We're talking about something that was nearly 90 years ago. It must feel completely foreign to the young royals to this day, but does it still have an impact on them and what they think?
Yes and no, because I remember when, you know, the palace made the announcement that Harry was going to marry Meghan, and the fact that she was American, the fact that she was a divorcee, you know, those really threw out quite big questions and things that I think people initially found quite hard to sort of overcome, because she wasn't the traditional prototype of a royal bride that we were used to. And actually, I think those things have stood her in pretty good stead, actually, for the role. But yes, it raised eyebrows, and certainly, I think, in some of the corridors of power at Buckingham Palace, and I would imagine more with the older courtiers as well.
Paul, you were in the royal residence. Does Wallis Simpson, or was it ever mentioned, the huge impact that it had on the family?
Oh, absolutely. I remember stood feeding the dogs one day with the Queen, and it was Wallis's burial day, and she said, well, of course, Queen Elizabeth won't go. Charles and Diana and I will go to the graveside. So it was a very small gathering at her interment in the ground at Frogmore. So
why wouldn't she go?
Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, wouldn't go because there's such bad feeling between her and Wallis.
She hated Wallis forever because she blamed Wallis for the death of her husband, King George, because King George was not ready and had not, he was the spare. He had not been prepared to be king until his self-obsessed, selfish brother decided to march off into the sunset with this American divorce.
There's actually a scene in The Crown where she's very rude and says that she's, you know, killed one and forwarded the death of her others. Do you actually think that was what was going on behind
But
the
strangely
scenes?
enough, it made Queen Elizabeth, because she loved being queen and she made a great queen. So she supported her husband through that and helped him to become a good king.
Well, I think that maybe
got
the
the best
jury's
deal.
outside of
We
that,
got the
because
best
if you
deal.
think about the way they raised their children, they raised what we're lucky to have as a great queen. But frankly, Queen Elizabeth II, her, none of her offspring have done too well in their relationships, have they?
No.
And that's...
Is that a matter of the time, or is that a matter of that family?
I think it's something to do with that family. You look at how unsuitable Queen Elizabeth's other child, Princess Margaret, was. You know, she courted scandal and misbehaviour her entire life and was literally another loose cannon. And there was fears, actually, was there not, that she was effectively like almost a chip off Uncle Edward's block.
Loose cannon's never good in the royal family. We have discovered this footage of the Windsors' last ever TV interview, which was recorded at the home in Paris.
In January 1970, the Windsors were interviewed together for the last time.
Do you have any regrets when you look back on your life?
Oh, about certain things, yes. I wish it could have been different. But I mean, I'm extremely happy, and naturally we've had some hard times, but who hasn't? So you just have to learn to live with that. We've been very happy.
Sarah, after that scandal and the rumours that they weren't truly in love on both sides, they did remain together.
They absolutely did. And whatever Wallis Simpson's sins, I think she paid for them in all those long years of trying to make up to her husband, the Duke of Windsor, for everything that he'd lost.
But that little interview, she actually reassures him that they have been happy.
Yes, haven't we?
But it is plainly her who's in the driving seat of that interview.
Yeah.
Yes,
And do you think that was the same all the way through that relationship?
I do.
Absolutely.
I think absolutely. Those letters from him to her, to other mistresses, are those of a neurotic little boy. They're really quite worrying letters. And she found herself then caught by his very neediness.
And the world's attention.
Yeah.
Well, in a wonderful gesture, the Queen ultimately made peace with her uncle and allowed his body to be buried in England, a gesture she subsequently extended when the Duchess of Windsor passed away a decade later. We're talking about the changing face of divorce in the royal family, and soon after the abdication, a second constitutional crisis was on the cards, this time courtesy of the Queen's sister. How serious could this have been, Sarah?
Well, I think it could again, given the views of divorce at the time. OK, the world was beginning to change. We were moving, you know, from the 50s towards the 60s, but it hadn't gone that far yet. So, OK, by this point, Princess Margaret was not the heir to the throne, obviously. She was several steps down the ladder. So had she been prepared to renounce her royal status, yes, it could have happened. But I think it still raised a lot of uncomfortable questions, really.
Like what?
About whether a member of the royal family should be allowed to marry for love, where love fits into the equation with duty. It's always been a bit of a balancing act.
We've talked about love, Katie, but it's obviously what everybody gets up in the morning, hopefully finds. The royal family, though, seem quite stiff upper lip, but this word love is being used again and again. Do they let love rule their personal lives?
Well, I think if you look at the Duke of Edinburgh and Queen Elizabeth, it is the most enduring royal love affair ever. 71 years of marriage, and he has been her strength and stay. She has said that publicly. It's been a remarkable friendship as well as a relationship. And I think it must still be a source of sadness to the Queen that 3 of her children's marriages ended in divorce. 3 out of 4, you know, that's a high statistic. For a woman who made those vows of marriage in a church, the defender of the faith, you know, divorce was never an option for the Queen, even if at points, you know, it might have been all she wanted. It was never ever going to become a reality.
Do you think it did great with her?
When you talk about love in the royal family, you only have to watch the engagement video of Prince Charles and Princess Diana when they are asked, "Are you in love, sir?" And he says, "Whatever love is." Watch Princess Diana's face. She's astounded by that comment, meaning, I mean, don't you know what love is? Are you marrying me for love? She soon found out that she wasn't married for love. She was married to become a broodmare to provide him with an heir and a spare to the throne. That seems rather cold and callous. Only 4 years into her marriage, she delivered 2 boys. She delivered Harry, and on the night Harry was born, Prince Charles came to see the baby in the cot, and he looked at the baby and said, "Oh, now I have my heir and spare." She said,
Really?
Diana told me the night that happened, she said, "I cried myself to sleep, knowing my marriage was over. My duty was done."
But there was plenty of warning, wasn't there? Because during the engagement, there was a shocking newspaper story here in this country that actually cost a great editor his job. And that was a story suggesting that Prince Charles, before the wedding, had a tryst with Princess Diana on the royal train. And the royals, the Buckingham Palace and so on, they absolutely denied this and said it was utterly, categorically untrue. And eventually that editor lost his job. What became subsequently clear is that the story was wrong because it wasn't Diana. It was Camilla Parker Bowles. And that during the engagement, he had smuggled on Camilla Parker Bowles onto the train while he was engaged. In fact, that editor missed an even bigger story, really.
And that's actually fact that we know that that was the case now.
And because
Well
of that,
documented.
intertwined seas then meant poison for the princess, and she found a pair of cufflinks on the honeymoon with intertwined seas, knowing that they'd come from Camilla as a wedding present. And then she instructed me in my time with her to unpick all the C's on her Chanel shoes and her Chanel handbags. She could not bear the sight of two intertwined C's.
It must have been a toxic atmosphere at that time.
It was.
How did you navigate it?
Very difficultly at times. It was impossible because I had one foot in the prince's camp and one foot in the princess's camp at that time until the princess rescued me from Highgrove and brought me back to London. My allegiances were always with her, of course, because I loved her. In every sense of the word, I loved her because I knew she was vulnerable and she had a bad hand.
And then what happened in the relationship between Charles and Diana is you then experience, or we in the press sort of stood back and watched a very public war between the two, with each side using the press, using the press to attack each other constantly.
We're talking about divorce, and Diana never wanted a divorce. I saw the letter that came from the Queen from Windsor Castle on her stationery. Diana showed it to me. It said, Charles and I have discussed your situation, and we feel, along with the Prime Minister and the Archbishop of Canterbury, that the best solution for the country is that you divorce. And she said, I don't want a divorce. I want a separation. I want to bring up the children together in a family unit. I don't want to be divorced. She had no option.
Was it
was a
part
royal
that
command.
to do with she always knew that what Charles wanted most in life was to be free to marry Camilla? And I've always wondered whether part of Diana's sort of intransigence in this, or attempted intransigence, was to prevent that marriage.
No, but even if they're a divorce, Neil, he couldn't have married Camilla, not with Diana as an existing wife. As a divorced man, he could not marry her. The only way he could marry Camilla was if Diana was dead.
Kate, do you think this has had ramifications to her sons and how they treat marriage?
Yes.
Harry wasn't quick to go down the aisle, was he?
Harry was very quick to go down the aisle. I mean, in terms of his relationship with Meghan, because that was a whirlwind relationship.
He wasn't 21, 22.
No, and he had several quite serious relationships before then. William courted Kate for 10 years, you know, and he said, you know, made her wait those 10 years so that she really could have a chance to look in and get out if she realised that this was not what she wanted. And I think, I remember being told this for the biography I've just done on Harry from one of the former staff members who said that Diana told the boys to marry for love. And they did that. They didn't necessarily marry the blue-blooded aristocrats that had been the expectation, of course, when Charles married Diana. They both married commoners. I hate that word, but that's essentially what they are, and they've married for love.
And Kate is absolutely right. Harry actually has been in love several times. He wanted to find love. He wanted to do what his mother said.
Yeah.
In the past, he's actually not really been a Lothario of a prince. He has had long relationships, and I know of at least one of them who said, well, two of them actually. One of them said, I can't go into that goldfish bowl, and so made a grown-up decision to step away. And another one who said, he's too intense.
Intense in what way? In the relationship?
Yes, precisely. What he wanted, and one of the reasons he's walked down the aisle so quickly with Meghan, and he's fallen so head over heels with Meghan, was because he wanted to get married. He wanted to heed what his mother said. He wanted to be settled like his brother.
Yeah, he was sorry, I just think it's worth making that point, that he was always quite in awe of his brother's relationship with Kate. And I think it's very normal for children that have grown up in a broken home to then want to go on and really never experience that themselves. You know, the Cambridges have a very long, enduring, loving relationship. And I think we all hope that it will be the same for Meghan and Harry, because going back to that point you made earlier, I do still think divorce is a bit of a dirty word in the royal family. It's still got that stigma. Look at the leaps that Charles had to jump through to marry Camilla.
And yet that marriage of Charles and Diana, it really represented the clash of two different worlds, didn't it? It was the old royal world and the old way of marriage meeting completely different expectations. And perhaps that's why it went so hideously wrong.
And she was only 18 when she arrived at the front door of Balmoral Castle to stay the weekend. No one knew who she was. Lady Diana Spencer arrived with nothing. And she said to me, I'm in the deep end here. I don't know how to cope with this.
Again, it goes back to the royals not expecting anybody to understand what they're going through. They just go in one direction, everybody has to jump on board at the same time. we've talked about the royals and love and relationships and divorces. Do you think the press has had any effect on forwarding some of those relationships to coming to an end, or have the royals been involved behind the scenes with the press?
I think in the main, people live their lives, and I don't believe that the press is capable or has been capable of breaking up solid relationships. If the relationship was right, it would survive. However, once we got to the War of the Wales, both sides used the press remorselessly against each other and would absolutely use their positions to advantage themselves in the public eye and disadvantage the other in the public eye.
When you say that, does Diana get on the phone and speak to somebody, or is it somebody lets know that there's this information out there? Well, how does it work?
Well, to be honest, in both ways, depending who the journalist was, you know, you could get a call from Diana who would tell you something. I know when I once paid tens of thousands of pounds for a royal biography. And this was a devastating royal biography that was going to, for the first time, specifically say, Diana has been having relationships since the marriage breakup. Now, that had never been formally confirmed. This was put to the palace on Friday night. Suddenly, on Sunday morning, the story broke that Fergie and Prince Andrew were going to divorce. A momentous story. And guess what? It blew my biography, my buyout, for which I spent tens and tens of thousands of pounds, completely out the window. Never sold a copy.
You must have been furious.
Livid. But the point being, Diana was supposed to be still friends with Fergie. And she was prepared for her own ends to blow the other one away, and that's what happened.
So, Paul, were you there at that time? Did you see any of that? Is that hearsay?
No, that's not hearsay, that's true. The princess used the press to the best possible advantage, and she befriended people like Richard Kay from the Daily Mail, and she did use them as a voice. Remember, she was a princess trapped inside a palace with no friends.
Was she retaliating, or was she trying to punish?
A little bit of both, I think.
But the person who suffered so much, I think, was the Queen, because for the Queen to have all of this dirty laundry aired in public must have been so devastating.
But she'd read it all from Margaret. She'd read all that from Margaret. Every morning, you know, Neil, the Queen gets every single daily newspaper on her breakfast table. She flicks through it, whether it's the Markles, whether it's William and Kate, whoever it is, she reads everything.
She doesn't
believe it.
If she reads all those papers, what's her action afterwards? Does she pick up the phone and advise one of the members? You know, something happens with Sarah Ferguson and she thinks, right, I need to sort this out, or does she just take it in?
If something worries her about her nearest and dearest, she will confront them.
Which is why she stepped in with Charles and Diana. I mean, listen, the press had every right to report on everything. If you've been on that tour of Korea, when Charles and Diana were back to back, there was no chemistry at all, there was no interaction. You can't avoid that. You can't not write to those photographs.
Another thing that is worth pointing out for balance here, I don't want anybody who's watching this to think that Diana was a bad woman. Diana was surviving, and she was surviving against a palace machine that, let me tell you, trashed her day in, day out. They leaked information, they tipped you off about things, they told you what was going on to the detriment of the other side. Well, Diana actually was a natural survivor, but really, she was surviving with a very small circle of her personal friends as advisors and some people she knew in the press.
Sarah, we're looking at this as a microscope of the last 100 years of the royal family and tabloid newspapers. But going back in time, the Tudor times or whatever else, it's still a royal family, everybody's interest. Was there still this PR damage limitation going on in different ways?
Well, in different ways, of course. We didn't even have newspapers. But, oh, yes, I think the arts of propaganda, you can certainly see them back then, as far as the Wars of the Roses. Yes, absolutely. But I was very interested in what you said, that the press can't break up a really solid marriage. And, of course, we saw an instance of that with Elizabeth and Philip. Back in the early days of that marriage, it's no secret, as on the Crown, that Prince Philip didn't find his role easy. And in sober truth, there were these stories. There was the man close to him, Mike Parker, who was divorced, and Buckingham Palace did, most unusually, feel it necessary to issue a statement saying there is no rift between the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh.
What is the rules when it comes to the royals making statements?
They don't do it very much, basically, I think.
I think the Queen thinks of it as a very personal situation, and why should she have to tell people about it? It's her relationship with her husband. Why should she discuss it with anyone? Why should he discuss it with anyone? It's their relationship. They still share the same rooms in whichever royal residence they're at. They love each other in their own way. He still calls her cabbage.
One of the things you've got to remember as well is that the Queen, particularly back then, almost comes from a world where they believe that the monarch is appointed by God. Now,
Divine right.
Divine right.
The Queen
That's
believes
right.
that.
And one of the reasons that you hear these stories about the Queen will abdicate and let Prince Charles take over, that is never going to happen for one simple reason. She effectively says, I was appointed by God to be Queen, and I will be in that role at his behest.
How can Charles argue with that? Well, I think it's a testament to Her Majesty and to the love for each other that the marriage of the Queen and Prince Philip is the longest in British royal history, and that's pretty amazing, even if you're not a royal. Our discussion is about divorce, so we should go full circle and address the fact that nearly 90 years after the first American divorcee shows up, along comes a second who this time gets the red carpet treatment. Neil, what was the first time that you remembered hearing about Meghan?
Well, I'm not sure. She seems to have been here forever, actually.
Had you got rumours that he was dating somebody seriously?
Not until the story started to come out, no.
Really?
He had gone... I suspect he was getting some good advice. I suspect that he was consciously trying to keep his relationship much lower profile than they had been. And, of course, don't forget an awful lot of it. He met her in America and spent a lot of time with her in America. Is that not right, Katie?
In Canada. Well, they actually met over here because a mutual friend set them up on a blind date at Soho House, and from that blind date came another date, and then he whisked her off to Botswana, and they conducted the first few weeks of their relationship in the bush, under the stars, away from everything. But you're right, Neil, they kept it very below the radar. I mean, for Harry to have a serious relationship for several months before it came out with the likes of me and everyone else sniffing around, trying to find a huge name, a big star in her own right. But I think it did help that she was based in Toronto. He would literally shuttle off to Toronto for a long weekend, pull his baseball cap down, jump on a scheduled flight and spend the weekend with her.
It's amazing that Prince Harry could slip under the radar.
But you know what? It's called hiding in plain sight. And actually that has been the key to their early courtship staying below the radar.
But you know what is a great tribute to Harry? People like Katie and I, you know what we depend on? We depend on the phone call from people on the inside who actually tell you things.
And I don't think he told anyone, you see. I think, I mean,
But
I
there must
just
have
had
been
heard
detectives
nothing
who
about
knew.
it at all. It really came as a bolt out of blue. And all credit to the Sunday Express for breaking that story, because that was a scoop.
So what do you think Meghan has brought to the royal family, Sarah?
Oh, a huge amount. It actually fascinates me how often the royal family, even in marriages made for love, it often seems that this spouse coming in is bringing just what the royal family happened to need at the time.
It's
I mean,
very
we
true.
actually saw it with William and Kate. It used to be, back in history, that princes were expected to marry for the good of the country, usually to make an alliance with some foreign power. Well, guess what? End of the 20th century, now, it's not alliance with some little German principality that the British royal family needs. First, it was an alliance with their own ordinary people, and that's what Kate brought to William. And now, expanding even further, Meghan's, the whole interracial thing, the whole showbiz thing.
And America, the country.
Absolutely.
An even more
it
special
brings in
relationship.
so much to the royal family,
And I think this is part-
particularly within the Commonwealth. Sorry, that a lot of people in Britain and beyond, in the Commonwealth, which is so important to the Queen, are going to feel connected to the British royal family in a way they didn't before.
Probably helps that she's gorgeous as well.
That wouldn't hurt.
Well, there's that.
I think that Harry's heart broke when his mother died, and I don't think he saw such humility and humanity until he met Meghan.
We hear in the press playing out that Kate and Meghan maybe don't get on so well, or some of the staff, there's a quick turnover with them, and they got their favourites. Do you see any of that kind of battlement going on?
Well, I see it from my old days. Of course, there's a huge turnover of staff at Kensington Palace when I was with the Princess. It's inevitable that's going to happen. Meghan's finding her feet. She's trying to find her way as a new royal and soon to be a new mother in this family which is dysfunctional and is the top family of the country. It's a lot to ask of a young girl like
But
that.
she's already changing who she wants around. Do you think she knows what she wants?
Oh, I think she definitely knows what she wants. I don't know if she knows what she's let herself in for, but those are two very different things. But yes, I think we've all been quite surprised by how quickly she seems to have gone through a PA, a private secretary. You know, when you look at the boys, they keep hold of their staff. They tend to have staff for at least, you know, a good 10 years. People
So what's
don't really
the
leave
inside
quickly.
track if they're not staying for 10
I think
years?
it's quite simply that she is a very confident, outspoken, driven woman. She knows what she wants. She is an American. There is a cultural difference here as well. Meghan will think nothing of getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do yoga and start firing off emails to staff. But, you know, as anyone who's worked in the palace knows, that's not really what we're used to. So I think it's a bit of a cultural clash. And I think they've also had to brace themselves for this stick of dynamite who has gone in and lit things up. And frankly, it needed it. And you made such a good point, I think, about this woman coming into the royal family at the right time. And I think Meghan is the right person at the right time.
But we hear that she still has to courtesy in front of Kate, but at the same time, she's getting rid of people that she doesn't like. How does that... Is that an easy thing to do if you've only been there 6, 7 months?
No, I mean, the idea of having to curtsy to your sister-in-law, I mean, must be utterly extraordinary, whether or not you get along with them. And I think the finer details of that, I hate the word protocol, but etiquette, I think she's struggled with, because these are archaic, ridiculous traditions in many ways to an American. Do they get on? Listen, I am not hearing any concrete evidence of a catfight. I think it's far sexier to have a rift between two duchesses than the truth, which is actually that there was a bit of a falling out between the brothers.
Well, the boys are always going to be at the heart of the nation in Britain. Are they talking? Are they still cooperating? Are they spending?
But Paul will tell
they were
you,
the closest.
as brothers, they have an unbreakable bond. They are the only two people on earth who can identify with what they've been through and how they felt. Do they have fallouts? Do they have ruckuses? Of course they do. But, you know, are they not talking? No.
But you've got to remember with Meghan, I think, there's never been a creature like Meghan coming into the royal family.
Not since Wallace.
Well, no, I think they are different, actually, and I think in Meghan's favour massively. I think she is an intelligent woman. She has created a career. She has been divorced, and as far as you can see, her divorce was amicable, and she has dealt with staff herself. She is also an actress. If she has to go through curtsying to Kate, I suspect she simply puts her acting head on and thinks, I've got to do this just like I've got to say a bad line sometimes on my TV show.
Well, all the things you've just said, though, Tim, honestly, there are people inside the palace that will not like Meghan because of where she comes from and who she is. The grey suits the princess referred to, the establishment, they'll view her as some sort of danger. They'll view her as a sort of intruder. And there will be that to deal with too.
Well, we can certainly agree that they are in love with each other and that Harry has her back. Let's remind ourselves of that glorious day.
Happily Ever After has finally arrived. After a whirlwind 2-year love story, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are tying the knot.
Well, there is a certain irony to where Harry and Meghan chose to make the home, isn't there, Sarah?
Well, there is indeed, yes.
Can you explain it to...
Frogmore Cottage, in the grounds of Frogmore House, which is part of that huge Windsor royal village, you might almost say. But yes, of course, it is a place with history, because that's where finally, you might say, the story of the Windsors came right. They were buried together, side by side there.
It's poetic, and that's where they're also choosing to spend a lot of their time. And the burial of somebody that from 90 years ago caused such a fracas in the royal family.
Yes, I know. It is ironic. One wonders whether or not they think of the history. You know, one wonders whether there will be. Yes.
They're bound to.
Yes.
As they wander through the grounds of the mausoleum where Victoria and Albert are buried, and they see in the garden Wallis and Edward. Another American lady all these years later must think about history.
Do you think Meghan will lay flowers?
I bet she will.
We have this real image of Meghan doing yoga at 5 a.m. in the morning, sacking courtiers and then going in laying flowers at the... What is the day-to-day life of the young royals? In a snapshot of, do they spend a lot of time together? Are they constantly doing engagements apart?
They spend a lot of time together. I mean, remember, at the moment, Meghan and Harry are still living at Nottingham Cottage, so they're still a foursome at the moment at Kensington. And,
is it tiny?
Yeah,
Tiny.
the cottage is very small, isn't it?
Why would the royals be living in tiny cottages?
Because it's a nest. It's the little love nest.
There wasn't anywhere else available, I think, at the time for them.
Really?
So
it's opposite the door of apartments 8 and 9 where Harry and William grew up.
Yeah.
So every morning he'll open the curtains and see the place where he lived with his mummy.
But their day-to-day routine really depends on whether there is an official engagement in the diary. If there is, obviously, that will take up most of their day. I think they're doing a lot of research. I mean, Meghan particularly has spent a lot of time researching charities, organisations. I think they do a lot below the radar that the public aren't aware of, whether that's private visits to people of the Grenfell tragedy or an organisation that they sort of think they want to start getting involved with. So there's a lot of that going on. There's not so much going to bougie and hanging out at nightclubs these days.
But there is a reality, isn't there, now, that, you know, what you had was 2 brothers, 1 wife. The Wills and Kate, and Harry was very happy to float around that sort of thing. The brutal reality is, with no sinister twist to it, you now have 2 separate courts with 2 separate demands. And you have Wills and Kate, who have all of those children, and you have this other young couple who are being used more and more and more for royal duties, and particularly foreign royal duties. Inevitably, that's going to go like that, isn't it? And separate
I think it has
somewhat.
to as well. You don't forget that William is preparing for his role as the Prince of Wales. Okay,
And
his role, as we said before, and King eventually. They're very separate roles. So I think the idea that they were going to be a cosy foursome. I know we loved this Fab Four, this thing that the press had come up with, this Fab Four. It was never going to be a reality.
No, I think that way disaster would have lain.
I agree.
In fact.
Harry, we've been talking about divorce. We have to come to a conclusion and say, do we think that the young royals are in love? Do we think their marriages are in good state?
They know what love means.
They know what to expect. There's no skeletons in any closets.
Oh.
I mean, does
don't know
anyone
about that.
know what to expect? Any
Oh, hold
couple?
on, there is skeletons in the
Oh,
closet.
no, I don't know about that.
Well, don't forget that Meghan has been married before. Don't forget that Trevor
And
Eccleston
she's
hasn't.
35.
She's 37.
She's not a child.
She's not. She's had a full life, and her husband has never spoken out yet.
Not yet.
What do you mean hasn't spoken out?
He's never given an interview. So
Her first husband.
this is the first
Do you think
husband.
that's going to happen?
I do.
I would never say never, but I do hear he's penning a very interesting script about an American who goes off and marries a British prince. So who knows?
Well, who would that be based
In
on?
life might one imitate art, or art might one imitate life. We shall see.
Well, that would be interesting to see. Well, as the nation's attitude to divorce changed, so did the royal families. If marrying a divorcee had been allowed nearly a century ago, how would our royal family look today? Well, you've heard from 4 people who all have very different links to the royal family, and thanks to their experiences, you have gained an insight into the monarchy. Thank you to Neil, Sarah, Katie and Paul. The documentaries that we featured in this episode were 14 Weddings and a Divorce, The King Who Threw Away the Crown, Harry and Meghan, The Royal Wedding. You'll find these documentaries in full and many more, all giving an insight into royal life on True Royalty TV. See you next time.